You know, for millions of people all over the world, standardized tests are a really big deal. They're more than just a test, they're gatekeepers. And if you're aiming to study or work where English is the main language, the TOEFL is one of the biggest gates there is. A great score can open up a world of opportunity, but a low one, well, it can shut those doors right in your face. So, how do you get past the gate? For a long, long time, there's been a huge industry built around helping people pass this one test. And one of the most famous tools was this book right here, the Longman Preparation Course for the TOEFL. For so many students, this big, heavy book wasn't just a guide, it was the key, the thing that was going to unlock their future.
But that brings up a really interesting question, doesn't it? Is just being fluent in English actually enough to get a good score? Or is there something else going on? Is a book like this teaching you the language, or is it teaching you how to beat the test itself? That's exactly what we're going to find out as we crack open this classic prep book.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on why the TOEFL is such a big deal. Then we'll dissect the paper test to see what people were really up against. We'll do a deep dive into the listening section to see the strategies in action. Then we'll zoom out to see how it all fits into this Longman skill method. And finally, we'll crack the code on what it all really means. Okay, so first things first, what exactly is this test? Well, at its most basic, the TOEFL, that's the test of English as a foreign language, is all about measuring how well non-native speakers can use and understand English. But it's way more than just that. As you can see here, it's not just some test you take to get into college. Oh no, it's a standard that's required by a ton of universities, government agencies, big companies, and even scholarship programs. For millions, getting that score isn't a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity. And that's why the stakes are just so incredibly high. All right, if you want to know how to pass a test, you've got to understand the machine you're fighting against. So let's break down the paper version of the TOEFL that this book was designed to help you conquer. Now, what's wild about this is the sheer pressure you can feel just by looking at the numbers. Take the listening section. You've got 50 questions and only 35 minutes to answer them. That's less than a minute for each question, and get this, you only hear the audio one time. For grammar, 40 questions in just 25 minutes. The speed you need is just insane. It means you can't just know the answer, you have to find it, and find it fast. And that pressure cooker environment is exactly why having a strategy is so absolutely critical. To see what I mean, we're going to zoom in on the listening comprehension section. It is the perfect example of how the Longman method really works. See, the whole idea here is to completely shift your mindset. The book basically argues that you can't just sit back, listen, and hope you catch the answer. No, you have to be an active listener, on the hunt for the specific patterns, clues, and, traps that are built right into the test. Okay, so here is the first little hack. In one part of the test, you hear a short conversation between two people, and then you get a question. Well, skill number 1 tells you a secret. The answer is almost always a restatement of what the second person says. So your strategy? Kind of tune out the first person and put all your focus on that second line. And this just shows it perfectly. All the important information comes from the woman, the second speaker. She says he forgot to turn in his research paper. And guess what the correct answer is? He didn't remember to submit his assignment. It's the exact same idea, just paraphrased. Once you know the rule, the answer just jumps right out at you. It's almost obvious. Now let's look at a totally different kind of skill. This one isn't about finding the answer, it's about avoiding the traps. The book points out something really sneaky. The test makers will intentionally use words in the wrong answers that sound like words from the conversation just to throw you off. Here's a perfect example of how they do it. On the recording, you hear the phrase, searching for a new apartment. Now, when you're stressed and in a hurry, your brain might just latch on to the sound of that word. The test makers know this, so they'll throw in tricky answers with words that sound similar, like department or appointment. The strategy here? You train yourself to spot these sound-alike traps and immediately know to avoid them. And these little skills and tricks, they're not just for the listening section. They're all part of a much bigger system. So let's zoom out and take a look at how this whole skill method applies to the entire test. I mean, if you just take a quick look at the table of contents, it's pretty overwhelming. Seriously, for just the first 2 sections of the test, you've got page after page of topics, negatives, passives, modals, verb tenses. It feels like a never-ending list of grammar rules you have to somehow cram into your brain. But here's the genius of it. The book doesn't ask you to memorize everything. Instead, it breaks the entire TOEFL down into more than 60 separate, manageable skills. Each skill is a specific, actionable strategy for a specific kind of question. And this goes for everything. There are skills for spotting bad grammar, for finding the main idea in a reading passage really fast, and even for how to structure your essay. The whole method turns this giant, scary mountain into a series of small hills you can actually climb. So after digging through all of this, what's the big takeaway? Well, it takes us right back to our original question, and it really reveals a whole philosophy about how to take a test. You know, you don't even have to take my word for it. The book's own introduction says it all. The authors are being totally upfront here. To pass the TOEFL, you need two things. Yes, of course, you have to work on your English, but, and this is a huge but, you must understand the test-taking strategies. Just knowing the language isn't enough. So this is the crucial point. The Longman method is a system. It's designed to help you decode the test. It teaches you to see the exam for what it really is, not just a simple measure of your English, but a game. A game with its own rules, its own patterns, and its own traps. And this book? This is the rule book. This is how you learn to win. And all of this leaves us with one last, really provocative thought to chew on. If you can master all 60 of these skills, recognize all the patterns, avoid all the traps, and get a fantastic score, does that mean you've actually mastered English? Or does it just mean you've mastered the TOEFL? It's a question worth thinking about, isn't it?